History is a story, but not always a complete one. For every famous name we learn in school, there are dozens more who quietly shaped the world without ever making it into the spotlight. They were women, people of color, immigrants, voices that challenged power, broke barriers, and changed America from the ground up. But most of them were left out of textbooks, ignored by the media, forgotten in the footnotes. This is not an accident. The stories we're told are filtered through politics, privilege, and prejudice. What gets remembered and what gets erased often depends less on impact and more on convenience. But history doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the people. In this video, we're shining a light on the hidden figures who helped build, defend, and transform the United States, without recognition, without reward, and often at great personal cost. These are the names you should have heard, the stories that deserved to be told. Because understanding real history means hearing all of it. Let us start with the young woman who refused to give up her bus seat, months before Rosa Parks, and was never given credit for it. Now we start from the women who changed history, Claudette Colvin, the teen who sat down for justice. In March 1955, 9 months before Rosa Parks made history, a 15-year-old girl named Claudette Colvin boarded a Montgomery City bus and changed the course of history, quietly and without credit. She was returning home from school, sitting in the middle section of the bus, the area black passengers were allowed to use unless a white person needed a seat. When the driver demanded that Claudette give up her seat for a white woman, she refused. She didn't move. She later explained that in that moment, she felt the presence of Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman guiding her. Police were called, and Claudette was violently dragged off the bus and arrested. This wasn't just a protest. It was a spark. Yet when civil rights leaders looked for a face to represent the bus boycott, they passed over Claudette. She was young. She was dark-skinned. She was from a working-class family. And weeks after the arrest, she became pregnant. Leaders feared that her story wouldn't withstand public scrutiny. So Claudette's name faded into the background, even though she later became one of the plaintiffs in Browder v. She did everything Rosa Parks did, first, and never got the credit. Her story is a powerful reminder that the first to act aren't always the ones remembered. Grace Lee Boggs, the philosopher of revolutionary change. Born in 1915 to Chinese immigrant parents, Grace Lee Boggs spent over 7 decades on the front lines of American activism. A philosopher by training, she had a mind built for deep thought. But she chose action. In the 1940s, she became involved in labor movements, civil rights, and Marxist organizing. But it was in Detroit, among the black working class, that Grace found her political home. She married James Boggs, a black auto worker and revolutionary, and together they formed a radical partnership rooted in racial justice, labor rights, and community empowerment. Grace Lee Boggs challenged the traditional boundaries of activism. She didn't just march in protests, she built institutions. She co-founded Detroit Summer, a multicultural youth program aimed at rebuilding communities from the ground up. She wrote extensively about what it meant to create revolutionary change, not just through confrontation, but through transformation. She believed in changing ourselves to change the world. She didn't seek fame. She sought change. Lillian Wald, the forgotten founder of public health nursing. Lillian Wald was born in 1867 to a Jewish family in Ohio. By the late 1800s, she was a nurse in New York City, and what she saw changed her life. Overcrowded tenements, immigrant families without access to health care, children dying of preventable diseases. In response, she founded the Henry Street Settlement on Manhattan's Lower East Side. It became a hub for community health care, social reform, and justice. Wald is credited as the founder of public health nursing in the United States, but her impact went far beyond medicine. She advocated for school nurses, visiting nurse services, and health care for the poor. She believed that health wasn't a privilege, it was a right. Lillian Wald was also an early advocate for civil rights. At a time when segregation was the law of the land, she insisted that her programs serve Black and immigrant communities equally. She hired Black nurses, pushed for racial integration, and fought for women's suffrage. Despite her groundbreaking work, Wald's name is rarely mentioned outside of nursing textbooks. Yet, her vision shaped America's approach to public health for generations. She wasn't just treating illness, she was healing a broken system. Why these stories matter. Claudette Colvin, Grace Lee Boggs, and Lillian Wald represent three very different lives. A teenage girl in the segregated South, an Asian American philosopher in Detroit, and a Jewish nurse on the streets of New York. But they all have something in common. They stepped up when no one else did. They challenged systems. They built alternatives. And they left behind legacies that reshaped the country, even if the country forgot their names. Their stories aren't just interesting. They're essential, because the history of America is not just the history of presidents and generals. It's the story of the people who refused to be silent, who built movements, who cared for communities, who made justice personal. And, too often, those people were women whose names we never learned. Let's change that. Second part of this video is about people of color who rewrote the rules. Bass Reeves, the real Lone Ranger. Long before Hollywood invented the Lone Ranger, there was a real lawman who rode through the Wild West bringing justice to the frontier, and his name was Bass Reeves. Born into slavery in 1838, Reeves escaped during the Civil War and found freedom in what is now Oklahoma. There, he lived among Native American tribes, learned multiple languages, and became a master tracker and marksman. When government resistance and surveillance. 1. COINTELPRO, the FBI's secret war. The civil rights movement wasn't just fighting against segregationists, it was being watched and sabotaged by the highest levels of the U.S. government. The FBI's COINTELPRO program, short for Counterintelligence Program, was launched in the 1950s to neutralize domestic threats. But by the 1960s, its primary targets weren't foreign enemies, they were American civil rights leaders. Under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI wiretapped phones, infiltrated meetings, and spread false rumors to disrupt the movement. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. was a top target. This wasn't passive surveillance, it was psychological warfare. 2. Discredit, divide, destroy. COINTELPRO's goal was simple: divide and destroy. They sent forged letters between leaders to cause infighting. They manipulated the media. They planted agents in organizations like SNCC and the Black Panthers to stir internal conflict. Those who got too popular were framed, arrested, or worse, eliminated. 3. The assassination of Fred Hampton. Perhaps the most chilling example was Fred Hampton, a 21-year-old leader of the Illinois Black Panther Party. He wasn't just organizing black communities. He was building multiracial alliances, bringing together Latino groups, poor white workers, and young people under what he called the Rainbow Coalition. That terrified the government. In 1969, the FBI and Chicago police raided Hampton's apartment. He was shot and killed while sleeping. An informant had drugged his drink the night before. No warning, no trial, just death. They didn't just fear the violence, they feared the unity. 4. Controlling the narrative. While agents operated in the shadows, the government and media shaped what the public saw. Peaceful protesters were often framed as agitators. Police brutality was downplayed or justified. News coverage favored sanitized versions of the truth. When Malcolm X called for self-defense, he was labeled a militant. When young people burned draft cards or questioned capitalism, they were dismissed as anarchists. The camera told a story, but it was not always the truth. 5. The consequences. We still live with the civil rights movement didn't end because the job was finished. It ended because of exhaustion, fracture, and repression. Many young leaders were dead, imprisoned, or disillusioned. Organizations like SNCC and the Panthers were dismantled or driven underground. The message was clear: speak up, and the system will push back hard. The civil rights movement was never a neat, polite chapter in American history. It was radical, it was dangerous, and it was constantly under attack. The victories were real, but they came at a cost we rarely acknowledge. To truly honor that history, we can't just repeat the same names and speeches. We must uncover the full truth: the surveillance, the sacrifices, the silenced. This was not just a fight for civil rights. It was a struggle for survival, against a system that feared its own citizens' freedom. The civil rights movement didn't end in the my 60s, and it never fit neatly into textbooks or museum exhibits. From Bayard Rustin to Fred Hampton, from teenagers risking everything to march to entire communities monitored by their own government. This movement wasn't just about gaining rights. It was about exposing a system that feared equality more than chaos. The truth is, the real history of the civil rights movement is still unfolding, and the most powerful thing we can do today is remember it honestly, learn the full story, and keep telling it. If this video opened your eyes to a side of history you didn't learn in school, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Urban Lore for more untold stories from history that shaped and shook the world. Comment below. Which part of this story surprised you the most? Or share a name you think history has forgotten. Because when we remember, we resist. And when we resist, we rewrite the future.